Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us today. Popped everybody up. That was kind of funny. Hi, thanks for joining us for this session today on developing a winning formula for distributed order management, or DOM technology, in retail and beyond. Of course, DOM has kind of emerged over the last half decade or so, I'd say. It's been around for longer than that, but emerged over the last half decade or so. Is really almost an essential piece for omni-channel commerce, in my opinion. We're going to cover some insights today, both from some expert opinion as well as a kind of mini case study from a prominent omni-channel retailer, Duluth Trading Co. So thanks so much for joining us today. Just to give you a little structure of how the session's going to go, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time kind of overviewing distributed order management, just to kind of get everyone on the same page. We have probably people in here who are very familiar, people in here who are just starting, somewhere in between. So just to level set everybody, I'll cover a little bit of ground there, but we'll try to again get to the main topics, and then that'll be a panel discussion between my guests and myself, which we'll introduce in just a second here, where we'll spend about 25, 30 minutes or so kind of going through a series of questions about their experiences with DOM in retail, and then we'll open it up for questions for the last 7-10 minutes, something like that. So appreciate you coming here again, and why don't we get right to it? Well, I guess we'll get right to it is me. This is sponsored by Softeon. I'll just introduce Softeon, the company, in just a second so you know who we're talking about here. Again, I'm Dan Gilmore. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at Softeon. We'll introduce the company in just a moment or two. On my extra left here is Satish Kumar. He's a Vice President of Client Services at Softeon and a world-class DOM expert. I heard him talk to a number of people that stopped by our booth here today, and man knows a lot about this topic. And then Chris Tufel, who is a CIO and VP of Logistics IT at a very prominent omni-channel retailer, Duluth Trading Company. Hopefully most of you know that brand very well, known for their iconic underwear, as well as a wide variety of men's and women's merchandise. So these are the guys that really know what they're talking about. I'm just going to try to facilitate the discussion today. So just a quick, so you know who the heck Softeon is. Hopefully most of you know the name, but if you don't, we're a supply chain software provider with a very broad suite of both execution and planning solutions, kind of anchored around three primary areas. One is what started the company 20 years ago, warehouse management systems, and all the stuff that kind of goes around that, labor management and yard management and TMS and parcel shipping and those kind of applications as well. And then distributed order management, that's what the subject obviously of today's talk. But we're doing that very successfully both at retailers and at brand companies, and actually well outside of retail, which is a little bit different than most. And then more recently, we've developed a thing we call a warehouse execution system, which is something that sits on top of a WMS, whether that's our WMS or a different WMS, a legacy, homegrown, third party, whatever. It just kind of takes picking and shipping optimization to a whole new level than is available from a traditional WMS, and really delivers a lot of productivity gains. So at some point, we'd be happy to talk to you about any or all of those things. We have some planning applications, other kind of things, but for today, I think I will just leave it at that. Just wanted to note that last year at the show, Satish and I introduced a new book, which we called the Little Book of Distributed Order Management. If you want to understand DOM in a relatively small number of pages, we encourage you to get a copy of that if you stop by our booth, which is 3942, I believe. Stacy, is that right, 3942?
That's there.
3942. You can, with a quick scan, register to either get a hard copy of this book or to get an electronic copy of this book, or both. I tell you, it's worth an hour read to get yourself up to speed on DOM. So just kind of, again, to level set everybody about what DOM's all about. It's a newer kind of software. It's been around for 20 years or so, but really it's only gained prominence in about the past 5 years or so. It's having a big impact on companies like Duluth and many others, but yet it's not very well understood. I said started 20 years ago. The original implementations of DOM were designed to hook up this new generation of e-tailers that were coming on the scene that didn't maintain inventory but were facilitating commerce. How did they connect and integrate with their suppliers of those goods to be able to promise and ship customer orders? But it's really, especially of late, as I said, become just a linchpin in omni-channel success. Hopefully by the end of today's conversation, you'll agree with me on why that is so. And there are many applications for DOM outside of retail omni-channel, but of course that's why most of you are here today. I'll just note, in addition to the little book that I just talked about a second ago, the prestigious CSCMP Supply Chain Quarterly, last May published an article that Satish and I wrote called "It's the most important supply chain software application that you don't know much about," and that turned out to be distributed order management. I can give you a link to that article if you want it, and certainly it's worth searching out there on the internet. It's a pretty concise piece that explains what's going on with DOM. So in the interest of speed, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to kind of bypass these first. But it's about being able to aware and monitor a network of fulfillment points and being able to do that in a multi-mode, multi-partner, multi-channel environment. You can get a lot more sophisticated. I'm not going to read through all of this here. This is a more complete definition, but I like to think of DOM as something like a Swiss Army knife. It provides you a wide variety of tools that you can use to apply to solve different supply chain problems. And one of the things that's really occurred to me over the last couple of years here is I don't think we've ever had a class of supply chain software that allowed you to define exactly how you want your business to work and then have that system just automatically execute against those rules definitions. And both currently at one point in time and to change those policies and procedures over time. This is something that we just don't have that level of precision with in any other software application that I can think of. It's something that really sets DOM apart in the fact that you can sit down and write on a piece of paper how you want the business to work, encode that in DOM in the rules and other policy settings, and then it's just going to work and execute according to that strategy. So very, very different kind of scenario here. So, what does it do? I'll just summarize this real quick. Real-time visibility to inventory, order execution, capacities, constraints across some kind of a network. You'll hear the analysts talk often about orchestrating order fulfillment, but then they never explain what orchestrating actually means. So what I would say is orchestrating involves applying a dynamic set of rules to each order, so it's executed precisely a way that you want to according to your business logic, as I just kind of said a second ago. It's got that rules engine foundation that's going to execute those policies and processes that you want to occur. And connectivity is key. We're going to talk about integration here today because it's a big part of the DOM story in multiple different ways. Automate the handling of order processes and be able to flexibly fulfill orders based on real-time visibility to what's happening to inventory, orders, capacities across your extended network, both your own network as well as the network of partners, whether those are 3PLs, vendors, other people that may be doing business with. And there's a couple of different key use cases for DOM. Number one is the just e-commerce enablement. How do I easily automate omni-channel processes like buy online, pick up in store fulfillment, returns, things like that? How do I do that in a way without having to go in and rewrite all of my existing IT systems? DOM can come in and sit on top of those systems and allow you to achieve that omni-channel capability without the disruption, the cost, the time, the risk of doing it all yourself. And one thing I'll just mention real quickly, I think is very useful, is something I came up with actually 10 years ago, of thinking about 3 different entities. Points of interaction, this is where and how I'm interacting with the customers, whether that's a phone, whether that's a website, whether that's a phone, a regular old-fashioned phone, whether that's a kiosk, whether eventually your television set, the subway stores where you push a button in Japan and place orders for pickup on your way home. Points of interaction, then points of fulfillment. Where are all the different places I'm going to be able to fulfill an order from, whether that's my own DCs, third-party DCs, stores, vendors, et cetera. And then points of return. Where are all the places that a customer can return those products. So the key is, how do I enable all of those combinations of points of interaction, points of fulfillment, points of return? How do I decide which of those combinations I need to be able to support? And this is the kind of capability that DOM can bring those kind of capabilities to bear at the beginning, and then over time. Maybe I add a point of fulfillment. Maybe I add additional storage, whatever. How do I quickly expand those combinations to accommodate my business needs? And then, of course, is the notion of optimal order sourcing. How do I find the least cost way to fulfill an order while meeting customer demand and capacity and constraint requirements across the network? So, and this is, you just see here, not expecting to make a whole lot of sense to you, but you kind of follow through there, kind of the logic that a DOM would go through to pick that optimal sourcing point. And this is how I help to drive better profitability into e-commerce operations by, number one, meeting the customer's expectations that we've set in terms of delivery, but then doing so at the least possible cost, recognizing there are constraints and capacities across the network. So I'm going to just kind of pass this. So we're now going to go to discussion, and I'll put on my reading glasses here to see my notes. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense to you here, and now we'll get into it with our prestigious panel here. And Satish, obviously you've followed this a long time. Anything just real quick to add in terms of what a DOM can do for retail beyond what I've kind of articulated there?
No, I think overall the industry continued to change. For example, Omni is, 4 or 5 years, and last year or last 2 years, the trend is deliver in 2 days. Now it's deliver in 2 hours for the pickup online. So if you can see the trend, it's changing, and that means technology or the product, whatever we use, has to be adapt to that. We don't have a 365 days or 2 years of implementation. So you need a tool like this, which is sits in the middle of the intelligent tool, and it makes those decisions. So I think it is before it was a afterthought, but now it's needed. Okay. It is not anymore a luxury item.
Very good. So, Chris, I kind of covered at a high level sort of the generic DOM use case and application. What is the role that DOM plays at Duluth?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start at the highest level, Dan. So, if you think about it from 3 different points of view, from our customer's perspective, from a buy online, pick up in store, which, we're trending at about 10 to 12% of our overall digital orders in just the past year that we rolled it out. So, from their perspective, it's being able to go into the store in 2 hours and, be able to pick up their item. It's also fueling the ability for us to optimize our inventory across the stores and DCs and not think about retail inventory versus e-commerce inventory. It's omni inventory, and we're able to optimize that across the chain. So end of season for us retailers means markdowns. It means clearance out in the stores. Instead of worrying about bringing that back, we're actually able to use the DOM in a way to make that inventory available online to customers and ship it from the store. So,
and in the end, it's a lot about the customer experience.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So maybe just walk us through a little bit, from a process perspective, on a daily basis, how is DOM used within Duluth?
Yeah, so, I think you referred to it as a Swiss Army knife. We like to refer to it as kind of the air traffic controller. So let me explain a little bit about our network so you can understand how the DOM plays such a critical role. So we've got 60 stores today. And in general, we think about using our stores for speed to customer. We're going to be testing same-day delivery. Satish, you mentioned, Amazon setting the pace, and we're all expected to follow. So we'll use our stores and our store inventory both for digital and store sales and leverage them for really speed. But, there's a component around labor scheduling in the store that you really need a consistent flow in the stores, and you got to match the rate that they're able to achieve, so you're getting them out every 2 days. So we'll be using order caps and DOMs to make sure that, we're trying to place the order as close to the customer as possible, respecting the order caps, and then that'll flow over to the next nearest store. And because our customers generally order 3 items per transaction, Dan, you were talking about expense. Well, for us, we really need to minimize the number of split shipments. So we're always looking at our rules to be closest to the customer as well as to minimize those split shipments. We're also playing with the idea of what we call mega ship from store. You can think about it as a mini DC. We don't call it that because we're really focused on omni inventory. So, we generally have 10 to 12,000 foot stores, but in many markets we're able to go in and get a 25 to 35,000 square foot store for the same price. So we're able to go to market, not worry about building out massive DCs, and be closer to the customer with our inventory because the DOM is allowing us to route inventory and allocate orders to customers.
So in that scenario, you'd be using more of a larger back room to store more products specifically for e-fulfillment, is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And then we'll fall back to the major DCs, obviously, for most volume. And, we're going to have more active SKUs in our overall assortment than we'll have in the stores. So, of course, those would be fulfilled from the DCs.
Very good. Satish, thank you, Chris. Satish, looking across different retailers and brand companies that we work with, are the processes and use cases very, very similar, or do they differ? And if so, where do they differ?
For most part, they're all the same, but everybody has their own nuances. Some use, as Chris was talking about, they use the mega pop-ups, and some retailers have the FSL locations, like forward stocking locations, which is closer, especially like New York City or high-density cities. They don't have the luxury of getting a 20,000 or 40,000 average expensive. Remember, with all this consumer changing requirement, you still have the pressure of the cost per unit. That's not changing. So answer to your question, Dan, it's more or less the same, but there is always, everybody have their nuances from their branding experience perspective.
Okay, very good. So I believe Softeon and Duluth started partnering together in 2014. Chris, you were more new to the company in the 2014 timeframe, so some of the history there, maybe I'll rely on Satish, who was at Softeon at that point. Starting kind of with the evaluation and selection process or whatever, what are some things that you think, Satish, that retailers should be looking for in terms of capabilities when they're evaluating DOM solutions?
Yeah, it's obviously it's a given is the Omni is a given, the Omni functions are given, And as you know that everybody has their own definition of what Omni means, but at least I talk to 10 people, I get 10 definitions or sometimes 12, but depending on how you ask it. So, the BOPIS is like everybody talks about it. We have all these acronyms now. Oxford started adding those anyway. So, some of them we will start with first with the BOPIS, because a lot of them we don't realize it is, we have the DOM and I can implement it, but it's the other animal called the point of sale system or the store associates. How are we going to train it? So we'll start with the BOPIS, and then you go into the ship from store, because some of these functions require customer store associates, because they're not your regular 3PL or distribution workers. They don't have that capability. Good luck, and we want them to sell the product. So I think the key is Omni is one of them, and the next one is we can't lose track of the overall operational efficiencies. Yes, we have to do the customer service. Customer experience is critical, but not at the loss of the company. You may not have the company if you don't do that. So we have to keep track of the operational efficiency, and that is, I'll say once again, there is a DCs, they want their efficiency, and there's a stores, and there's a consumer. So you have to figure out how to balance all the three. And that's where, as Chris was talking about, we continue to evaluate and change the functions. It's not like I had to go back and start developing, this is the trend, because the trend is, nowadays, it's like the firefly. It's not that long. It's only 2 days and 2 months. You have to change back again. So
one thing I'll just say is, in terms of like features to look for, whatever, as opposed to say like some of the other markets we're in, warehouse management, whatever, that have been around for many years, highly mature market, and we get these big giant request for proposal documents and all kinds of requirements or whatever. Often, we start interacting with retailers and others on distributed order management, they just have sort of, we know we need some help, we know we need to improve this, that, and the other thing. So if we get any kind of written requirements, it's a much smaller level, maybe a couple of sheets of paper or whatever, not reams of paper that you might get with a WMS. And I think that just speaks of sort of the newness of this product to the marketplace in the grand scheme of things, whatever. And so what we find is it really is a dialogue back and forth, and sometimes you have a certain amount of idea of what you need, but actually that dialogue will expand the understanding of what you need, because there's things in a DOM that you just didn't know were there, or there's things you can do with DOM that you didn't know were possible. So just something to keep in mind in terms of if you start looking for a solution, how you're going to handle that whole scenario here of requirements definition, RFP development. If you have something, is it going to be more of a dialogue? How you're going to look at it, et cetera. So Chris, that was sort of a view from what we've seen in terms of selection process or whatever. Now you've been using DOM for a few years. What are some of the key capabilities you think companies should be looking for?
Well, I think the one that Satish and I talk about in terms of future roadmap is you can make your routing rules very sophisticated, and the point that you determine there's an issue with your routing rules, you don't want it to affect your customers. So, one of the keys that we're talking about is how do you actually create simulations of what your actual order allocations are going to look like before you commit them and drop them down into your WMS for allocation. So that's also a great way to sit there and play what-if scenarios for your overall network, which is critical. The other one that we talk about quite a bit, which really enabled us to take advantage of clearance inventory sitting in the stores and making that visible to online, is we took the concept of our single view of inventory across the DOM and then created some capabilities around setting business rules around what inventory is actually considered sellable versus not sellable, and then created real-time integrations from our channels into the DOM to actually maintain that, so that if a customer comes into the store and buys this shirt, it's real-time getting removed from Softeon's inventory, so that as someone's trying to do a buy online, pick up in store for that same shirt in the store, it's gone from inventory. So I think people probably think about a DOM more from order placement further into execution, and we've actually thought about it differently and pulled it up into the channels to actually help that customer experience.
Okay, very good. Satish, one of the features at Duluth is actually using DOM almost like in reverse logic, if you will, but to really not only handle the outbound order sourcing, enablement, and all that stuff, but actually optimizing the inbound flow of goods. Maybe just real quickly talk about that.
Yeah, it's similar to the outbound orchestration or outbound sourcing. And the Duluth, actually, a lot of the retailers, we do the inbound order orchestration. In other words, basically, as Chris said, there are 60 stores and 5 or 6 different nodes, fulfillment nodes between the West Coast to the East Coast. So when the container comes in, whether it's a Far East or whether it's from South America, wherever it comes in, it's based on the past shipping history and based on the forecast, it automatically creates a transfer order so that you're not putting into the... Usually in a lot of places, you have a C.H. Robinson or someone is doing it in the Long Beach or one of the port, but there's a cost involved in it. Here, they will receive it, and they have anyway the shipments transfer orders. So it will create a transfer orders based on the placement so that, as Chris mentioned, being closer to the customer, it will automatically create the orders so that's the inbound orchestration. It will reduce the cost, and it will reduce your freight cost also because you're closer to the customer.
Very good. Just real quickly, Chris, in addition to the DOM, I think you're using some other Softeon solutions as well, right? WMS, a couple other things?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, and like I mentioned, the biggest kind of extension for us off of the DOM was really around the sellable inventory and making that really visible and updatable from point of service and our e-commerce platform, as well as call center.
Very good. Satish, I mean, one of the things that I think people are most going to want to hear about is the whole topic of integration. Integration, we said at the beginning, that DOM can enable omni-channel processes without having to change existing systems, but that means you need to be able to talk to those systems. So there's some stories out there in the market of these integrations and deployments taking a long time, a year or something, out there for others in the marketplace. I think it doesn't have to take that long. Give us some thoughts on integration, how long it's going to take, and what's the key to doing that well and fast?
Okay, Dan, it's going to be more this integration is one of the most controversial. If you ask people, they'll say 1 year, and most people get scared of it. But usually, we will always say, at least from the DOM perspective, the normal, normal integration usually is like 1 to 3 months or 2 to 4 months, depending on it, because we have an experience with integrated with the mainframe, where one order comes in 6 card files. Then we also have webhooks and the web RESTful services. So you have this much spectrum. The key for us is basically understanding that ecosystem. What is that? For example, if you're doing the BOPIS, if you look at it, a lot of the retailers, a lot of them, unless now there is better POS systems, we are relying on the POS system to get the store inventory. And initially, when we went live, they have the legacy POS system. It can only send once a day. That snapshot is as good. It's as good as not getting any snapshot. You know what I'm saying? Because it's 1 day old and customer may not. So integration is more of understanding of what the other systems can do and how much you can leverage. But the typical is 1 to 3 months. And you go with the legacy, and once the POS upgrade, like in the Duluth scenario, they upgraded their POS, then we went back and just integrated again. It didn't take 1 year, it took probably a month.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, let's talk about that a little bit. I think you've had to integrate, if you will, DOM 3 times based on changing some other technologies within your environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, rather than focusing on the number, it's really around creating a flexible information architecture and services between your platforms. To Satish's point, we went through round 2, which was replacing kind of our e-commerce platform and order management system and integrating back in. It was still fairly file-based.
Yeah.
But when we went to enable Omni, we knew we had to develop real-time integration and move to services. And I think between the time we started and launched it, actually right before peak, it was probably 3 months between start and finish. So again, integration's a journey. You got to get those initial interfaces laid down, but you really got to be thinking about the changing business process and be changing those interfaces, every couple months to match how your process changes.
Yeah. So what's the key in the big integration, if you will, you've gone through a couple of times based on changing environment? What's the key to getting that process right, and particularly the cutting over from what you had to the new paradigm?
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate in our size to, when you think about cutover, we're always thinking about how do you do experiments. Well, you don't put an experiment out in the wild in all your stores or all your nodes. So we don't pretend that we're going to get it right the first time. In fact, we know we're going to get it wrong. So we look to put it in a node that's not going to have a big impact, and then we sit there and we iterate on that until we're comfortable, treat it like a pilot, and then roll it out. Until you actually put it out into the stores especially, you don't know how the sales associates are actually going to work with the software. You think you know, you give it to them, and they're going to work with it in new ways and challenge you. So we constantly iterate on that. Everyone here is probably working on Agile, Scrum, DevOps kind of teams, and we think that's the right approach. And Softeon also works with Agile and Scrum, so it gives us the ability to quickly adapt.
Satish, in addition to what you've already shared, what can retailers do to facilitate that integration process so it is 3 months, not 12 months?
I think the first one is more of coming up with an abstract process, abstract design. What is that we want to do? And then we can go into the details. The first thing, at least, I'm a past programmer myself. The first thing is we go into the field mapping. Good luck, forget about it. You're not going anywhere. Try to understand where first the abstract can take. Okay, first I'm going to do whatever your e-commerce site is, and if you have a marketplaces, trying to find the commonality. Because remember, when we're building this, the business has to still run. We cannot disrupt that business side of it. So I think we will basically take the bigger picture and take within what is that our goal. Like as I said, I'm doing the BOPIS. That means I'm only integrating with just POS system, and usually can I do 10 stores at a time instead of all the 60 or all the 100? That would help you. Otherwise, if you try to the big bang, all of us know that it's going to be Christmas comes again. So,
switching gears a little bit to sort of the project implementation, whatnot, and Satish, you were there back in 2014 at Duluth. How did Duluth define the project, and what did the timeline look like?
As usual, usually the clients always, Chris. Clients always thinks it has to be delivered yesterday, but that's a different story. But it's the timeline at the time is 4 to 5 months is the timeline. We started in February, and I think we went live July 13th of that month of that year, 2014. But at the time, the focus was Omni was the BOPIS only. Initially, BOPIS was not in the picture. Their goal was, let's get this inventory sourcing getting closer to the customer is the main goal, and operational efficiencies. So that part is done. Then 6 months later, we did the first BOPIS store. So basically, it's a 4 to 5 months we went live with sourcing and the visibility, and getting the point of sale to just update the inventory level so that they can see across the nodes how much inventory I have. Then I think 4 to 6 months later, we went to first Omni go live. That's like 2015 January.
And really, that first iteration was ship to store because we didn't look at our inventory from an Omni perspective.
Because the POS can only give us once a day. You get at midnight, so I cannot really allocate any inventory. So what they do is they will select on their website. The customer will select, I'll pick up in the store. So the DC will ship to the store as part of the store shipments. They don't want to, from the saving freight cost, and the customer will get it in 2 days or 3 days. It's always there's 100 emails in the Excel spreadsheet exchanging. But now, as Chris mentioned, it's all the real time. We get the real time POS feeds whenever they make a sale. DOMS inventory gets updated. DOMS knows what is the real inventory on the storefront as well as in the back room. So you know that when they're allocating or when they do the layaway.
Yeah, very good. And kind of along the same lines, what is the process for taking these business requirements across multiple dimensions and turning them into the business rules that's going to govern the DOM? How do you make that translation?
Yeah, it's a similar. One of the downside of it, or let's talk upside. Upside of it is you have so much flexibility. You can dynamically change the rules, depending on whose product you use, but dynamically change the rules and update it. In the busy season, they'll continue to update where I'm going to source from based on the capacity. The downside of it is because it's so flexible, you would need an Einstein to figure out the rules because they contradict each other. And in the end, because there's always multiple actors. There's an operations, there's a store, and there is the finance people who keep looking at the bean counters. They're looking at the money. So how do you balance out this? So the question was basically the requirements will be defined, and the way we always suggest, at least personally I would suggest, is let's try to take first one step at a time. Let's not try to optimize everything at one time. Believe it or not, it never works. It is not easy. Even the smaller organizations, bigger organizations forget about it. It's try to take one BOPIS and how do you optimize it? Because at some point you will be losing, like for example, freight optimization a little bit, but in the long run you will make it out because once you understand how the network works, how the people works. So basically we take the rules and say, as Chris said, that's what we're doing, the simulation. It's like, network simulation. What happens if I adjust it? So it's basically what if analysis. What happens here if I don't have a capacity? Or what? So
I think the one thing I'd add, Dan, is with the routing rules the way they are, it's not a traditional approach. I'd encourage people to throw away the thought of how they thought about requirements and designs. You really need to just get in and start actually configuring the model and simulating off the model, because when we went and implemented what we call ship to zero, which is leveraging our clearance inventory in the stores, we actually negatively affected our DC efficiencies and started sending orders to places we didn't expect. And that's where the capability around simulation becomes so critical. So.
Yeah. And along with that then, explain to the audience, what does your internal support team look like for managing the DOM, and you're changing rules all the time, once every never, somewhere in between?
Yeah, so we probably have a team of 4 to 5 analysts that we've called our air traffic controllers. And their main function is really on a regular basis looking at kind of the optimization of orders across the overall network nodes, making sure that any one node's not getting overloaded or underutilized. As we've talked about, we've got a model where we've got third-party logistics providers as well at a higher cost. We're also always trying to manage how we're flowing orders to our third party versus to internal network nodes to optimize expense, minimize split shipments. So there's that proactive kind of, how do you flow it? Is it flowing as I expected? And then on the back side of that, on a regular basis, we're always looking at data coming out of the DOM to say, where are split shipments happening that we're not expecting? And we've been able to manage that down to about 6%, which, 94% success rate on shipping full is very.
So you're repositioning inventory based on the DOM feedback? Is that what's going on?
We're more interested in having the DOM take advantage of where the inventory sits.
Okay.
On the proactive side, we're absolutely looking at affinity models and forecasts to allocate inventory to the right place. Then we come back on the backside and say, okay, is it shipping from the optimal location closest to the customer, or is it shipping from the East Coast to the West Coast? If that's happening, we have to look at, is that an inventory issue or is that a routing rule issue? And so this team is constantly evaluating that on a daily, weekly basis.
Okay. And Satish, your more just general overview in terms of what kind of support staff is needed. We had some people at the booth earlier today asking that question. I think it's typically not IT people, right?
It's
business analyst type. Yeah.
It's non-IT. It's more of them who understands the business, as Chris said. If you think about it, they have to understand how the stores works, how the DCs work. I'm not saying they don't need to know all the details, but because you make one change, it will impact across the framework, across the network. It is the ecosystem. You need to understand how the overall ecosystem works. So as far as the dedicated, usually it's my experience within different industry, retail, manufacturing, 3PL, it's usually around half% to a person who has a knowledge of it. But there's always other people who are wearing different hats. We all wear different hats, so that's really it is. It's not an IT role, it's more of the business role.
Chris, is there one person that understands the whole thing, all the rules and all the configuration, or is it segregated in somehow by part in the process?
So, generally, if you think about how we're structured, we've got leadership that's focused on a combination of process and location. So we've got leadership on inbound capabilities. That includes bringing freight in, receiving it, going through QA. It's getting it out to the stores from a replenishment perspective. We've got omni fulfillment focus. So that team's focused on not only pick, pack, ship out of the DCs and the main nodes, but also the best practices in the stores. And then we've got a continuous improvement team. And really each of these teams are focused and own the rules for their own areas.
Okay.
As we talk about routing rules in particular for fulfillment, those live under the Omni fulfillment team. And then continuous improvement team engages all the time to help them monitor and figure out what adjustments to make.
Okay, very good. You mentioned a couple of examples of leveraging DOM data for some other. Is there any other examples of things you're doing, or?
The biggest side is really the analytics. So when you think about optimizing your expense efficiencies and figuring out, if you want to be 10 or 15% more efficient, and that means pulling it out of your 3PL partners, are you adjusting enough zips to those partners to pull the traffic away? All that has to be mined out of the DOM and understanding what's flowing where and how. So,
very good.
And again, that supports what Satish said about these are not IT people. In fact, one of the value propositions we find with Softeon is, since it's a SaaS solution, my team doesn't have to worry about the scalability or the technical underpinnings or worry about AWS since we're an Azure shop. So from our perspective, it's just being focused on the network and optimizing the expense efficiencies of the network.
Very good. We've got a few more questions. We're going to close to open it up for Q&A. Just real quickly, Chris, maybe any final thoughts? Lessons learned, keys to success, anything you'd like to share with the audience?
I think, similar to the comments the gentleman made in the RFID presentation here, is this is a journey. If you look at Omni and you look at DOM as an event, you're not going to be successful, and I wouldn't set expectations within your organizations that it is an event. It's very much a journey. You'll make a lot of mistakes, and hopefully that you've got a supporting structure around piloting that you'll get to a state where you're ready to roll it out. But you need to really think about it in a non-traditional fashion.
Okay. Satish, how about for you? Any lessons learned or keys to success?
No, I think it's more of a thinking of the abstract way, and as Chris said, it's a journey. And compared to the other systems, this is more of a logical, intelligent layer in the middle. So you really you have a very good opportunity how you want to deploy it to fit because that today's fashion now for 2 hours, tomorrow I'm going to guarantee you they will say, it's half an hour, you'll have it. So you had to think that way. We cannot future-proof or we don't have the crystal balls, but I think take it in a one step at a time. Some people I've seen it try to implement everything. It's not an easy one.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Well, we're going to open up for questions. We've got about 8 minutes left. Obviously, if we run out of time, you can come up and ask your questions individually. I'm going to note just one more time on the plug. If you want to copy this book, electronic or physical, Softeon booth 3942. It's literally right around the corner. If you go out, turn right, and then turn left, we're right there. It's a great thing to summarize your understanding of DOM. So with that, we'll open it up. And I think Dan's got a question there. We have a microphone, I believe. Who's got the mic? Where'd Dinesh go? Oh, I thought we had the mic ready.
I can yell.
All right,
go ahead, Dan.
I'll repeat it as necessary.
You talked about simulation. In our environment, they have one banner that's 30,000 SKUs and 200 stores. So I changed a rule in DOM. How do I know it was any good?
Well, few things. One.
Did you guys hear that? He said a big retailer has a big network, 200 plus stores, all kinds of SKUs. If I change a rule, how do I know it was a smart decision?
Yeah, I think that's where you have to be really dialed in on what your KPIs are and trends. You're not going to spot just one order, and nor are you going to care.
Exactly.
Really, you're looking at the bigger macro trends around your split shipments, around, are the orders in general and percentages flowing to the parts of the node that you'd expect. When you start to see those go out of variance, then, at that point, you really have to dig deep into the analytics and start figuring out where it's coming from. And in general, as an example, when we implemented the recent clearance rules, when you troubleshoot, where do you start? Well, you start where the latest change was made. So we went back, analyzed where that change happened, and learned. But you really need to make sure that you have dialed in on your key measures, and you're looking at those from trend lines, and you're setting improvement goals to improve those over a certain percent. And if you're not getting there, why not? And it's always going to be a combination of, is the system right, or is the inventory in the wrong place? And so that creates some interesting dynamics between the logistics team and the inventory teams, but everybody's gold on the same measures.
Other questions? One over there?
For your DOM platforms, how do you strike a balance between the different interest groups within business? with regards to maximizing inventory allocation for sales versus fulfillment versus BOPIS and allocation between stores and the online?
That sounds like a darn good question. I'm going to.
That's a great question.
Be able to hear the answer. To
So from a Duluth perspective, with our culture, it's customer first. So when we think about our guiding principles, our number one principle is speed and accuracy. So bar none, 98%, we need to be shipping in 3 to 4 days delivery to the customer. Down from that, it's about expense, minimizing expense. And so that really drives how we set up our rules relative to zips, relative to minimizing split shipments. You do need to prioritize what those variables are because ultimately a business rules engine needs to work along those sets of priorities. So for us, speed and accuracy and ship in full for the customer experience trumps expense. And then after that, we make sure that we're optimizing on the split shipments, shipping from suboptimal locations, and also stockouts.
One thing I was going to point to the question about, was it a good, Satish, right? There's a capability that if something happens and you're not sure why it happened, you can drill down and find the specific rule that triggered that. You might mention that real quick.
Yeah. No, that's what, when the rule happened, we'll know that, to Chris's point, we do publish the KPI saying that why this went, so that they can modify or they can change the inventory, why we are sending it to East Coast more.
Well, let me expand on that. So, I think when you talk about our support analysts that are looking at this, the nice thing about, the DOM and the way the Softeon system works is it's actually leaving an audit trail, right, of how did that line flow through the routing rules and which, it's rule one. So it's very easy to go in for the team and start looking at where unexpected behavior is happening.
To just closing that, we have another customer, it's a pharmacy. Their pharmacy benefits manager, our largest pharmacy. For them, it's not the customer experience, it's more of the accuracy, and they want to sell full order. So it varies by industry. 3PLs, it's a different. Once again, their margins are 2 to 3%. For them, it's more of the lower cost operational efficiency. So it varies by the industry, and and their guiding principles. Other than wearing a Dr. Phil hat and trying to solve everybody's problem.
Good question.
And another follow-up question, that do you see a trend like wherein the DOM as a function getting decentralized and like safety stock being evaluated in a separate platform, returns in another, sourcing in another? Because we have seen some of that happening with players like Onera and all coming into the market.
For where we are in our growth story, we're not mature enough to think about best-of-breed solutions by function. We're really focused on just leveraging the investment that we have in Softeon and working with the Softeon team to grow their feature capability where needed. Reverse logistics might be an interesting place, but instead we're more focused on eliminating returns and understanding what's driving the return.
We do see that in other industries, that is there as part of the returns, whether instead of sending it from the store back to the DC, we will automatically ship it directly to the consumer, especially the drop ship. In the manufacturing world, that is happening more than we think. So we are doing that a lot now in one of the manufacturing side.
Do you see that as becoming a trend rather than remaining?
I won't know that. It all depends. It's a policy. When anything comes to the inventory, it's every company is different. It might be, but there is a tool.
It's kind of like the guiding principles we talked about, and you're either going to be a best-of-breed shop or you're going to try to take more full advantage of the capabilities and the partners that you have.